Good afternoon. I am Nigel Allen and I'm the moderator for this COVID-19 update for Wednesday, August 26. We are joined by Yukon Premier Sandy Silver and Yukon Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Brendan Hanley. Our sign language interpretation is being provided today by Kevin Klein from Winnipeg. We also have with us Andre Bussier from the French Language Services Directorate, who will translate any questions from French-speaking reporters. Following our speakers, we will go to questions from reporters. We will call you by name and you will each have one question plus one follow-up. Premier Silva.
Thank you very much, and just a quick shout out to Mary, who's normally with us, who's on a much deserved vacation. Hope she's out there having a good time. I want to thank everybody for joining us on the traditional territories of the Ta'an Quachin Council and the Kwalin First Nation. I'm very pleased to be here with Dr. Hanley. It has now been 3 weeks since we've entered into Phase 3, our longest phase. In this phase, the changes that will take place will gradually and adaptive, will be gradual and adaptive, and we will adjust to new life under this reality. Last week, we were able to welcome students back to school in Yukon. We have done this by adapting the way that we deliver services, and while schools look differently this year, it is something to celebrate that our new reality includes a safe place for children to learn. As we set the tone for the new and different school year, I would like to thank parents, teachers, administrators, the educational community for everything that you are doing to be flexible and to work through this unprecedented challenge together with your students and children. There will be bumps along the road, but I am confident that we can work together as a team to give Yukon children the best education possible this year. We are the first in the country to send our children back to the 2020-2021 school year, and I'm very proud of the collective work that has been taken to make this happen in a safe way. We have received lots of feedback that students are excited to be back into the school, to further the good work that has gone into adapting our schools to function in the safest way possible. We have received additional funding from the federal government, all of which will go towards further adapting our schools to respond to COVID-19. The Prime Minister announced $2 billion for all provinces and territories to support a safe return to school. Now that translates in the Yukon to just over $4 million that will be provided to Yukon to provide in two different allotments, approximately $2 million now and approximately $2 million at the end of the school calendar year, We're very happy to receive this support and very appreciative that the federal government's understanding of the ongoing financial burden that COVID-19 has created. These funds can be used in a number of different ways. They could be used, there's lots of flexibility. They could be used in adapting learning spaces. They could be used for things like new desks or whiteboards. They could be used for custodial staff, cleaning supplies, the procuring of personal protective equipment, additional buses, additional cleaning on buses, mental health supports for students and staff, and further health and safety training for staff and for teachers on call, and more supports to meet the needs of students and also the community's needs as well. This funding is flexible, and we will be using it in a different variety of different ways as school plans are changed and adapted in response to the current health situation. On top of the hard work of school communities, educators, administrators, school councils, and parents, the milestone of welcoming children back to school was only possible because of the dedication and sacrifices of Yukoners, of all Yukoners, who have done their part to keep us all safe. To date, every time that we've had a case of COVID, we have kept community spread at bay by following the rules individually and working together as a community. Each and every one of you are making changes, adjustments, and sacrifices every day to help reduce the spread of COVID-19 and to keep us all safe, and I thank you very much for that. With no active cases of COVID-19 and no known community transmission, Yukon remains very well positioned in Phase 3 to continue a path of adapting and responding to our new reality. As always, I want to take a moment to remind us all of the Safe Six, keeping physically distant, so staying 2 meters apart from anybody outside of your bubble, staying home if we feel sick, following the new social and organized gathering guidelines, and respect the limitations on group sizes. Limit travel to rural communities and be respectful when you do go. Self-isolate when you're returning from travel to anywhere outside of British Columbia, Northwest Territories, or Nunavut, or if you have come in contact with anyone who has been diagnosed with COVID-19. And most of all, most important, wash your hands and wash them frequently. Before I pass things over to Dr. Hanley, I would just want to say once again, thank you. Thank you for following the guidelines to keep yourself, your loved ones, and your community safe. We can't thank you enough for doing that, Yukoners. With that, thanks again, and have a healthy and safe rest of your week. Dr. Hanley.
Thank you, Premier Silver. Like the Premier says, we're almost a week into the school year, and I want to echo my thanks to all the people who have made this happen so far. The kids have taken some brave first steps into the classroom and are, perhaps with some dragging of the feet, rejoicing at being with their friends again and being in the social milieu of school. For all its emotional ups and downs, that is such an important environment for children to experience again. Parents, I know, are still anxious about how this will all turn out, but also relieved, by and large, that school routines are starting up again. So I echo my thanks to students and parents for your patience and your trust and for your contributions to making this work. And thanks again to all the teachers and principals and support staff and departmental staff who have worked so creatively and with such passion to make the schools safe learning environments for our kids. This is another brave and necessary step towards renormalizing our lives in the face of a pandemic. None of this is easy. Every school has developed a plan based on public health guidance, and no two schools look the same. That is good, and we will all learn from each other. There is no textbook or app or program for this work. And as we achieve yet another pandemic landmark, we can reflect how we are all learning how to live with COVID and to live with the increased uncertainty in our lives that the pandemic has brought to us. Last week, I was listening to an interview with an author, and I heard her quote a well-known Arab proverb, "When there is danger, sing to it." We can learn to adapt to risk and danger in remarkable ways. Think of people picking their way through shards and rubble after the latest disaster, or surviving from day to day in areas where war prevails. Millions of people are right now living with threats of famine, plagues of locusts, conflict, war, extreme climate events, or dangerous workplaces. Yet they make the best of it, have families and love them, talk and play with friends, make plans, and enjoy whatever they have the opportunity to enjoy. Here, we're living hardships like some of us have never experienced. We don't quite know what tomorrow or next week will look like. We have to live with added uncertainty, with loss, even with fear. On the other hand, looking around the country and the world, we have to admit Yukon is in a very good place today, whether we talk about COVID-19 and its impact or our overall well-being. So while today we may need to live with a little fear and a lot of uncertainty, we have to find those ways to sing to the danger, to carry on living our lives to the fullest in the best way that we can in these times. In this part of the world, most of us hardly think twice about living with another lethal threat in our midst, bears. But we are reminded frequently how dangerous and unpredictable they can be, including recent intrusions in Marsh Lake and the tragic attack in Saskatchewan. But by and large, we have learned and continue to learn to live with bears in our midst. We all have our bear awareness and our bear stories, and that is part of our lore. Around the world, we're seeing a resurgence of COVID-19 in some places that had managed to reduce and control the spread. In some areas, people who were ordered by law to remain in their homes and who have just started to reemerge are now facing quarantine again. Because of the steps we took early on and the measures we introduced, we've been able to recover a little bit more quickly and move towards that reopening plan that we're in. But even as we move further along in this phase 3 of Yukon's reopening plan, we have to remain methodical and cautious. Again, this week, following the openings of schools, I've heard from many individuals, again, demanding that we close the border with BC to prevent COVID-19 from getting in. Of course, our border was never closed. People have since the beginning been able to travel in if they were critical or essential, or if they were traveling through to either Alaska or Northwest Territories. Food suppliers continued to transit through, as did those delivering other goods. But since the entry order was lifted, travel is no longer so restricted, but quarantine requirements remain in place. On July 1st, we removed the self-isolation requirement for individuals from BC, NWT, and Nunavut if they were able to come directly to Yukon. Everyone else coming through our border must still self-isolate and provide a plan to the enforcement officers at the borders. At this point, I wish to continue the slow and careful pace. I do not want us to have to move back, but I do feel confident that we can stay where we are. I'm not yet advising that we lift self-isolation requirements for those coming from other jurisdictions at this time. You'll see the travel statistics in the information bulletin for today. Most travelers into Yukon since April 29th who stayed in Yukon are from those traveling from outside the bubble areas in Canada. Second are Yukoners returning from outside, and third are BC travelers coming in. As we open up, we do accept greater risk, but I believe the risk is well worth it. Since July 1st, we have hardly seen a rush of new cases. In fact, we have only seen one new case in Yukon since that date. 2 months of the BC bubble and one extra case in Yukon, with no one having serious illness. I don't wish COVID on anyone, but overall, I have to think that's a pretty fair trade. And I remain very confident that there is neither widespread disease nor community transmission of COVID within our borders. Opening up to BC more, but by removing these quarantine requirements, has been very important for Yukon, allowing increased travel in and out, families to reunite, increased opportunities for visitors from BC, more economic opportunity for retailers here, and allowing for easier flow of goods and transport. These are all elements of a healthier society. Just like getting our kids back to school, we have had to move in directions where we're taking a small risk for a greater good and learning to live with the situation as it is today. Children need to go to school. Parents need to go to work. Life needs to go on. Babies will be born. People will form relationships and people will die, COVID or no COVID. Closing our border to BC would not guarantee us any gains in stopping the spread of COVID-19, and letting fear rule our lives is not going to keep COVID-19 at bay. So with nearly 1,000 active cases in BC, how worried am I? As I said last week, we're continuing to watch closely, and like the public health officials in BC, we are concerned. But despite increasing cases, there are a number of differences from the previous spike in BC. Most cases are traceable to known contacts and clusters. The number of hospitalizations and deaths is not increasing. And indeed, younger people and gatherings appear to be driving the numbers. But like Dr. Hanley states, the link in increased cases is to younger adults gathering in these large numbers without physical distancing. Pandemic fatigue definitely affects us all, but we must continue to counteract the risk of COVID with practiced, sensible measures, which means no partying at close distance to each other. The risk of importing cases from BC has increased, but by a very low amount, as the average rate of infected people in BC is in the range of 1 in 5,000. By reinforcing messages to our visitors and to Yukoners returning from BC, we will keep the chances of introduction of cases into Yukon minimal. More importantly, by continuing to observe public health measures, we will keep COVID contained even when it is introduced into Yukon. BC recently announced that party organizers will be fined $2,000 and partygoers $200 if they violate the gathering rules, to show how seriously their government is taking this inappropriate behavior. Likewise, it's up to all of us to respect those safe six and to avoid these types of actions having to be taken here. Young people may not be as worried about COVID, and mostly they are right. But this is not a danger to be courted with. I am sure we all read with sadness the tragic death of a 19-year-old, otherwise healthy young man in Quebec who died within 25 days of being diagnosed. Singing to the danger does not mean inviting danger in. It means facing up to it and learning to live with the risk by applying the public health measures based on the best evidence we have. It takes us working as a team to battle COVID, and our youth are a critical part of that team. They know that even when they feel young and strong and even invincible, their parents and grandparents may not be. Though they may need reminding at times, I know that our youth know well their responsibility to protect their elders and those who are more susceptible to infection, just as they were so carefully protected and nurtured through their childhood. So where to go from here? For now, we hold where we are, allow everyone to get used to the children being back in school, and work out all the kinks we can. We continue to watch trends in the rest of the country. We need people to continue to do the right thing. And for now, that does mean self-isolating for 14 days if you are traveling into or back to Yukon after being outside our bubble areas. That's a hardship, but I think that keeps us in reasonable balance for now. Eventually, I would like to move away from that model. When I'm more confident that our reopening measures are stable, that we can follow all the safe six and public health measures, then we can take another look at our quarantine measures in place and advise on the overall best approach for the health of our population. To do that safely, though, we must continue to do what we have been doing and doing so well. We need to follow the safe six. Wash our hands, stay 2 meters away from those not in our bubble or our cohort. We need to stay home when we are sick, avoid large gatherings. We need to travel respectfully and self-isolate if we return from anywhere other than BC, NWT or Nunavut, or have been in contact with someone who's been diagnosed with COVID-19. Self-isolation means 14 days for those who have traveled from those places where we're asking for self-isolation requirements to be in place. I know other places in the world are looking at ways to cut this down, perhaps with testing, perhaps not. We need more experience and evidence to do this. Many other options await us, but for now, as we settle into school and winter and flu season, we should hold on to what we know works well while we learn about other measures. We now have guidelines for contact sports and have published them on yukon.ca today. By adapting the way we play contact sports during the pandemic, we can get back on the ice, field, and court. So I'm very pleased that these guidelines are now available. The new guidelines apply to children and adult leagues and are to be used along with the Government of Yukon's existing sports and recreation guidelines. We've also published our revised guidelines for gatherings, and now that we're in phase 3 of reopening, of course, we have more ways to gather and to be together while keeping physically distanced. And just to review, we have 2 main types of gatherings: organized gatherings and social gatherings. Organized gatherings are seated events in a rented, which may be in a rented venue, such as weddings, celebrations of life, and cultural events. You can have up to 50 people at an organized event indoors and up to 100 people outdoors. Rental venues need to have an operational plan, and guests and organizers need to follow the plan. Social gatherings are events in private homes or public spaces, such as birthday celebrations, retirement parties, or backyard barbecues. In these situations, you can have up to 10 people indoors or 50 people outdoors for these sorts of gatherings, again, with spacing in place. Before I close, we all know that COVID is not the only scourge that crosses through all ages. Next week is International Overdose Awareness Week in Canada and in Yukon, and many community partners will be hosting a number of events next week throughout Yukon to raise awareness about overdose prevention. Earlier this summer, along with Yukon's coroner, we released the number of opioid deaths in Yukon since January this year. We continue to see high numbers of overdoses, and we remain incredibly grateful to all responders who are saving lives in their formal and informal capacities. There'll be more information published next week on overdose awareness activities. And that's all for today. Thank you. Merci. Merci, Cho.
Thank you, Dr. Hanley. We'll now go to reporters for questions, and we'll begin with Heine Lam from Canadian Press. Heine Lam, are you there?
Oh, sorry, I don't have a question.
Oh, okay, no problem. We'll move on to John with CKRW.
No questions. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Chris, CBC?
Yeah, hi. I guess my first question is regarding the last case, the last positive case, and there was contact tracing done here and in Dawson City. Clearly, that resulted in no community transmission. I guess I'm wondering if Dr. Hanley could speak to why that is. What did we get lucky? What was the lack of spread a result of?
You know, there are many things about COVID that we don't understand, and we don't always get all the information about every case that we might want. What we were able to establish after substantial contact tracing, of course, the exposure notifications, is that we found no spread, no contact, no positivity among any of the contacts associated with that case. So I think that's just, we could easily have found. We know that there are differences between how people transmit and spread disease, and that can depend on the setting, the environment, or it can depend on the person, whether that's the person transmitting or people who may be more or less susceptible. So there are many factors that can lead to one event leading to nothing, or to transmission, which of course could be one or a few or even many. So I think the combination of circumstances. Certainly one of the key learning points from this last case was that the case and all of the contacts, we observe really good compliance with preventive measures. So really, this was, I think, yet another example of how a case, by following good distancing measures along the trajectory and along travels, there were many possibilities that were prevented just because they were doing the right thing. And that was actually the same with any of the contacts that we identified. When they were out and about, they were doing largely the right things. So the contact circle was actually limited. We even among the exposure notifications, when we put out those large nets, of course we found nothing negative, just negativity cases. So I think. Yeah, there is definitely there's always that sort of capriciousness that I've referred to before about the virus. We know that in different circumstances, even in the same circumstances, you may get different results just based on who knows what other factors, and maybe some of that is luck. But I think largely this was contained because people were doing the right thing.
Chris, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Hanley. My next question is for the Premier, and that is about this $4.16 million that the territory will be getting for schools. Premier, you mentioned that the money is flexible. What, in your mind, are the priorities for the Yukon government in terms of where this money would be needed, and what do you plan to spend it on?
Yeah, I guess the conversation that we had with the First Minister's meeting yesterday with all the premiers and the Prime Minister was, the need for everybody has extra costs when it comes to COVID and getting our kids, our students back to class, but the needs in, let's say, Quebec or Prince Edward Island are going to be different than the needs in British Columbia or Yukon, and so we are surprised by this announcement, but pleasantly surprised by the announcement. And it's going to go a long way to help us with the learning spaces that we have, and as every single school goes through their new guidelines, their new plans. There's going to be bumps along the road as well in preparing for COVID and looking at best practices in one school versus the other. So again, whether it's for personal equipment or for cleaning supplies or for supports for mental health supports, health and safety training for staff, what we have to do is take a look at what has been already identified by the department as necessities, and also and what has already been identified as spending from within the department, but also some of the more external or new costs as they come up. Talking really quickly with Minister McPhee, she knows that that money will be very well spent. It's just a matter of now trying to work with the school communities, work with each of the individual educational facilities, and prioritize based upon need.
We'll now go to Gabrielle with the Whitehorse Star.
Hi, thanks. Another question for Premier Silver. I just was hoping you could elaborate a little bit. You said that some things have been identified by the department as necessities. What are some of those things?
Again, it's exactly what these funds are for. Things like, the adaptation of those learning spaces. This is an unprecedented year of getting students back into the classroom, and the school communities, each of the principals and the parents and teachers and the school communities have done such a great job of preparing. But we're the first jurisdiction in Canada to get out of the gates and get our kids back to the classrooms. So whether it again is additional buses is a good example where this support could come. It has the flexibility to allow spending on additional buses and additional cleaning of those buses. But at the same time, we've already allocated some funds for additional buses and routes, and we continue to work with our partners to make sure that on a case-by-case basis we get ahead of those needs. So a very welcome influx of just over $4 million from the federal government, but again, without that announcement, before that announcement, these are the things that we were planning for already. Personal equipment. We know that the Department of Education, working with Highways and Public Works, did a lot of great work to prepare for having masks and personal protective equipment. Now it's the question of, now that we have this $4 million, how do we prioritize it and get it back into the system so that we can continue to make sure that every one of our schools is as safe as possible for this return to classes.
Gabrielle, do you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, I'm wondering if you have an estimate of how much the adaptations to those learning spaces for COVID have cost so far. And are you aware of whether any teachers have spent their own personal money adapting those learning spaces, as I know sometimes happens even in a regular year?
As an educator myself, I can attest to that. I don't have those numbers with me right now. I know that the department has done a very good job of dealing with costs as they come up internally, and now this extra $4 million is really going to help in that support. But whether there was money coming from Ottawa or not, the health and safety of our students is the utmost importance as we get back to this new normal, as we get back to face-to-face classes, and working with the educational community, working with the Minister McPhee and her amazing team over there at the department, and the teachers will continue to prioritize based upon the need and based upon the involvement of each of those educational communities in each one of the communities.
We'll now go to Claudiane with Radio Canada.
Yes, hi. First question to the Premier also. in education. Some parents are wondering if this money would be considered to rent outside spaces or otherwise find ways to bring kids from grade 10 to 12 back to a full-time school year. Could this funding be used for that?
So again, the one thing that every premier across the nation said to the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister yesterday, we need flexibility. We need to make sure that this money is spent on our priorities. And as we always have, we will continue to make sure that those priorities come from the school communities themselves and to make sure that the money is well spent for the need. It's going to be an ongoing situation of obviously, working in the classroom and trying to get the students to have as much to maximize the amount of face-to-face education as we possibly can, and we will make sure that this money is well spent to increase and continue to focus in on the safety of our students and trying to get back to as normal as possible in these unprecedented and extremely unnormal times.
Claudiane, do you have a follow-up?
I feel I'm going to have to sacrifice my second question to re-ask the question, Premier. Will the kids be brought back to a full-time school year with this funding?
We'll give you an opportunity to ask another question too, Claudiane, but again, I don't have that answer for you right now. What we will do is we'll keep on monitoring the situation. Our goal is to get the classrooms to be as normal as possible, and we're lucky in Yukon in that we're going into the classrooms now, and we actually are having face-to-face education. We don't have community spread right now. I think we're in a better situation than most jurisdictions in Canada to get back to a more normal, but I can't tell you right now because I haven't been with the department in those conversations for every one of those individual schools to prioritize. I'll leave that up to the department to working with the principals, the teachers, the parents, and the school councils to make those determinations. But please, by all means, ask another question.
Thank you very much. Pour le docteur Hanley, c'est possible de me parler des directives pour les sports organisés quand on pense surtout aux enfants, aux jeunes, les sports scolaires, extracurriculaires, si ces sports vont pouvoir reprendre avec vos nouvelles directives là, que je n'ai pas pu consulter encore?
So the question is for Dr. Hanley. Can you please talk a bit about the new directives you gave for organized sport with kids coming back to school and all the sport activities coming back?
Oui, merci. Et pour la question, on a bien anticipé ces directives pour les sports, surtout des sports majeurs comme hockey, soccer, basket, que avec ces directives, on peut permettre les combinations des groupes, des petits groupes, jusqu'aux 60 personnes pour former ce qu'on appelle les mini-ligues ou des organisations où on peut participer dans le scrimmage ou dans les jeux, de jouer des jeux, effectivement, mais dans des équipes qui sont organisées dans ces groupes pour minimiser contact ailleurs avec les autres. Dans les détails sont dans les guides, dans les directives, mais c'est vraiment un moyen pour permettre de jouer des jeux au-delà de seulement des sessions de practice. I'll just repeat quickly because that's more detail than I gave in my talk. But the contact sport guidelines are published with the details, but one of the features that we're excited about is that it talks about mini leagues. So this is the formation of groups up to 60 people within an organized cohort, so that games and even tournaments can be arranged within that cohort, so that you're allowing that although you're trying to minimize physical contact, you're also allowing that normal contact that might occur within play, so that you can actually have games. But putting in all of the measures to, including limiting it to containable groups, so that again you're finding that balance between reasonable risk, but allowing kids and adults to actually participate in games in an organized way.
We'll now go to Marine with L'aurore boréale.
Oui, merci. Docteur Hanley, pouvez-vous répéter les consignes pour ce qui concerne les rassemblements, que ce soit les rassemblements d'événements organisés ou les rassemblements sociaux, s'il vous plaît?
So the question is for Dr. Hanley. Can you please repeat in French what are the guidelines for groups, how many people, and how it can be done for parties and different activities?
Oui, et merci pour ça, et aussi pour dire que tous les détails sont maintenant disponibles sur le site web. Mais en base, il y a deux sortes de rassemblements, ceux qui sont organisés, supervisés et assis. Donc, et avec ça, comme un événement comme une célébration de vie, un mariage, un événement culturel. Et là, dans ces cas-là, on peut avoir jusqu'aux 50 gens à l'intérieur ou 100 à l'extérieur, mais bien espacés, comme toujours. Et souvent, ces événements prennent place dans les venues louées. Et puis, on a une autre sorte de rassemblement, le rassemblement plus spontané, social. Et là, avec encore, on reconnaît que là, on a des gens qui sont pas assis, mais qui sont, peut-être plus spontané, plus social et plus informel. Et dans ces situations, on reste avec les limites on a mis déjà en place avec 10 personnes à l'intérieur et 50 à l'extérieur, toujours bien espacés. Donc, en somme, c'est ça. Merci.
Marine, did you have a follow-up question?
Oui, vous aviez mentionné dans la dernière conférence de presse qu'il y avait eu des rapports de personnes qui avaient des inquiétudes, qui avaient fait des plaintes, pas des plaintes, mais comme qui avaient rapporté des comportements qui n'étaient pas respectés, qui ne respectaient pas la législation. Est-ce que ça concerne les rassemblements?
So last week you said that there was a number of complaints about people not respecting the rules. Were any of these complaints regarding group of peoples?
C'est pour expliquer que ce que j'ai entendu, c'était les histoires, plus les histoires informelles. Donc, j'ai pas vu des plans formels, mais c'était, et pour ça, il faut peut-être avoir une réponse de ceux qui sont en charge de l'enforcement. Mais ce que j'ai entendu, c'était plutôt les histoires, les anecdotes. Et pour ça, c'était plus les rassemblements spontanés dans les rues, derrière les maisons, les endroits comme ça. Oui, donc, oui, c'était les rassemblements des gens, mais sans bien espacés. Donc, c'est ça, c'est comme ça reflète un peu la situation en Colombie-Britannique et ailleurs, qui est bien témoigné qu'on a associé les éclosions de COVID avec les rassemblements. C'est toujours ça qui me concerne. Donc, j'ai les soucis pour ça toujours et pour rappeler aux gens de l'importance de respecter les directives sur les rassemblements. C'est très, très, très important pour empêcher qu'on arrive aux mêmes places que Colombie-Britannique ou ailleurs.
We'll now go to Haley with Yukon News.
Another question for Dr. Hanley. I know this question comes up every week, but with Walmart instituting mandatory masks and Superstore announcing they're about to do the same, have your perspective changed on masks at all? Or what is Yukon Health, Public Health, instructing people right now to do?
Yeah, thanks. So a question about mandatory masks, and certainly I have the greatest respect for places of employment or places of commerce that decide with due caution to institute those policies. But that doesn't change my perspective from an overall point of view, where I don't advise at this moment mandatory mask policies as say a territorial initiative. I think that again it's similar to the approach that I've taken with the schools, that masks should be always reserved. It should be reserved for those places where physical spacing is not being able to be maintained. And unfortunately, those situations are still few and far between in our territory. So I think the increasing familiarization with masks, having masks available, especially as we're going to be more and more required to use them for certain settings, is a good direction. But I have no interest at this point in making masks a mandatory measure from an overall policy point of view.
Do you have a follow-up question, Haley?
I did have a second question. And that's as we move into the fall, which is flu season, but also Thanksgiving, December holidays. It's a big time for travel, and I'm sure people are starting to make their plans. Are you encouraging people to limit non-essential travel? How should they be approaching holiday plans they might be considering?
I think it's a good question, and I think we again have to look at that in where are we as a country and where are we overall. And I still, for one thing, I think there's a general reluctance for most people to travel, and a general discouragement of non-essential travel. But recognizing that that there is some interpretation involved in what that means, and if you haven't seen your family for a year or more, how important does that become? So a lot of that does come down to individual considerations. I think what I would say, if you travel wisely, follow all the requirements as you go through the steps of travel, and follow the law when you return, and follow the advice and the guidance and the law when you return. And even if you go to BC and return, just be very prudent, especially if you're in an area where there's more COVID activity. Even if there's no requirement to self-isolate, be aware of where you're coming from, and if you have been in contact or any area where there's active COVID, just be very aware of that and act accordingly.
Thanks, Haley. Thank you, Premier Silva, and thank you, Dr. Hanley. I'd like to thank everyone for their time today. Our next COVID-19 update is scheduled for Wednesday, September 2nd at 2 p.m. Thank you.